Lieutenant Kyle Reeves had always prided himself on his observational skills. As a security officer aboard the intergalactic Ark, New Dawn, his sharp eye for detail had saved countless lives and prevented numerous incidents that could have disrupted the delicate balance between the hundreds of species coexisting within the massive vessel. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the discovery that would change not only his life, but the fate of an entire civilization. The New Dawn was humanity's crowning achievement in interstellar cooperation, a city-sized vessel that served as home to over 2 million beings from dozens of worlds. Humans worked alongside the crystalline Zephyrians, the aquatic hydrons, and countless other species in an intricate dance of diplomacy, trade, and mutual survival. Among them were the Kazai, a reptilian species known for their exceptional linguistic abilities, many serving as translators and cultural liaisons. Kyle first noticed something unusual about Lara during the morning shift in the central mess hall. The sprawling dining complex buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy shared meals and conversations in hundreds of languages. Lara worked at Translation Station 7, her slender, scaled form moving gracefully between terminals as she facilitated communications between various species. To most observers, she was simply another Kazai, doing her job with remarkable efficiency. But Kyle noticed the small things others missed. The way she momentarily froze when a merchant offered her a piece of Althan fruit, a delicacy from a planet on the far side of the galaxy. How her pupils dilated in a distinctly non-Kazai manner when exposed to certain wavelengths of light. Most tellingly, there were the faint marks on her wrists that she kept hidden beneath her translator's band's marks that seemed to shimmer with an almost imperceptible bioluminescence. For weeks, Kyle observed her routine. Lara arrived early, worked diligently, and kept to herself. She lived in the civilian quarters, paid her credits on time, and had all the proper documentation. Yet, something felt wrong. The way she held herself spoke of nobility, not the practical efficiency of a working translator. Her knowledge of obscure dialects seemed too extensive even for a Kazai, and those marks on her wrists continued to intrigue him. The breakthrough came during a routine security sweep of the translation department. Kyle was reviewing access logs when he noticed irregularities in Lara's terminal usage. She had been accessing databases she shouldn't have clearance for, specifically astronomical data about distant star systems and quantum communication protocols. More suspicious still, she had been trying to access files related to the Althan system, a region that had been under communication blackout for months. That evening, Kyle decided to confront her. He found Lara alone in the mess hall during the night shift, cleaning her workstation with methodical precision. The massive hall was nearly empty, its bioluminescent ceiling dimmed to simulate nighttime, creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed at odds with the confrontation about to unfold. Working late again, Lara. Kyle approached slowly, his hand resting casually on his security badge. She looked up, and for just a moment he saw something flicker in her eyes, fear perhaps, or calculation. "Lieutenant Reeves, is there something I can help you with?" "Actually, yes. I've been reviewing some interesting data patterns, and I noticed you've been accessing systems outside your clearance level." Kyle pulled up his datapad, showing her the access logs. "Specifically, you've been looking into the Althan system. That's curious considering it's been under quarantine." Lara's composure didn't waver, but Kyle caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "I assist with translations for many species. Sometimes research requires broader access to provide accurate context." Research. Kyle stepped closer, noting how the ambient light caught those strange marks on her wrists. "Or are you looking for news from home?" The question hung between them like a charged particle. Lara's facade cracked just slightly, revealing something vulnerability beneath. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Have there been?" Kyle interrupted gently. "Because I've been wondering about those marks on your wrists. Kazai don't have bioluminescent melanophores, do they? But I know someone who might." Lara's hand instinctively moved to cover her wrists, but it was too late. Kyle had already seen the telltale shimmer, the faint patterns that were starting to become more visible as her emotional state fluctuated. "You're not Kazai at all, are you?" Kyle's voice was quiet but firm. "You're Althan. And not just any Althan, those patterns mark you as royalty." The revelation hit like a gravitational wave. Lara, or whatever her real name was, closed her eyes and seemed to deflate years of careful pretense crumbling in an instant. "My name," she said quietly, "is Kalara, Princess Althan Kalara of the Seventh House." Kyle felt the weight of that admission. The Althan system had been mysteriously quiet for months, with the Alliance receiving only sporadic communications about internal political restructuring. If an Althan princess was hiding aboard the New Dawn under false identity, something was seriously wrong. "What happened to Altha?" he asked, his security training warring with genuine concern for the woman before him. Kalara looked around the empty mess hall, ensuring they were truly alone. "Our son is dying, Lieutenant. Not in millions of years as the scientists predicted, but in months. The stellar collapse has accelerated beyond all projections. The government, they're only evacuating the nobility, the wealthy, the politically connected. Millions of my people will be left to die." Kyle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. "The Alliance doesn't know. The conservative faction of our government has been suppressing the true scope of the crisis. They're telling the Alliance that the evacuations are proceeding smoothly, that it's a controlled relocation. In reality, they're abandoning 90% of our population." Kalara's bioluminescent patterns flared with emotion. "I couldn't stand by and watch my people die while the nobility fled to comfortable exile. So you ran away from an evacuation ship and came here. What can you possibly do from the New Dawn?" Kalara's eyes blazed with determination. "I'm going to expose the truth. The Alliance has quantum communication arrays powerful enough to reach Altha directly. If I can prove what's really happening, if I can show them the real evacuation numbers, the Alliance will have to act." Kyle stared at her, processing the implications. A dying star, a cover-up, millions of lives at stake, and now he was the only one who knew. His training told him to report this immediately to Commander Briggs. But looking at Kalara, seeing the pain and desperation in her alien features, he found himself hesitating. "You realize," he said slowly, "that what you're planning could be considered espionage. Accessing Alliance communication systems without authorization, potentially causing a diplomatic incident." "I know the risks," Kalara said. "But I also know what happens if I do nothing. My people die not from natural disaster, but from the greed and cowardice of those supposed to protect them." Kyle was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with conflicting loyalties. Finally, he spoke. "The quantum communication array you'd need, it's in a restricted section. High security, limited access." "I know," Kalara said quietly. "I've been studying the ship's schematics for weeks. And you'd need authorization codes, biometric clearances?" "Which I don't have," she admitted. Kyle looked at her. Really looked at her. Behind the carefully constructed Kazai appearance, he could see the truth of what she was. The slight difference in bone structure, the way her skin seemed to drink in light, rather than simply reflect it, the alien grace that spoke of different gravity, different evolutionary pressures. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, but more than that, she was brave. Brave enough to abandon everything she knew to try to save her people. "But I do," he said quietly. Kalara's eyes widened. "You would help me? Why?" Kyle considered the question. Because it was the right thing to do. Because he couldn't stand by while millions died. Because something about this woman made him want to protect her, even from his own government. All of those were true, but there was something deeper. Because, he said, sometimes duty to conscience outweighs duty to regulations. That night, Kyle lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He had agreed to help Kalara access the quantum communication array, but the weight of that decision pressed down on him like the gravity of a neutron star. He was contemplating treason, potentially destroying his career, possibly endangering the entire ship. Yet he couldn't shake the image of Kalara's expression when she spoke about her people, the mixture of desperation and determination that spoke to something fundamental about justice and compassion. The next morning brought a complication Kyle hadn't anticipated. Commander Briggs called him into her office before his shift began. The commander was a stern woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform impeccable. She had the kind of eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. "Lieutenant Reeves, I have a special assignment for you." She gestured for him to sit across from her desk. "I want you to keep an eye on one of our civilian translators, Laura from Station 7. Kyle fought to keep his expression neutral. "May I ask why, Commander?" "We've detected some unusual activity in her access patterns. Nothing necessarily suspicious, but in these times of political instability among our member species, we can't be too careful." Briggs leaned back in her chair. "I'm sure it's nothing, but I'd like you to observe her routine, note any irregularities." "Of course, Commander. How long should I maintain surveillance?" "Until I'm satisfied she poses no threat to ship security." Briggs's gaze was sharp. "This is a delicate matter, Lieutenant. Discretion is paramount. We don't want to create unnecessary tensions with the Kazai community over a routine security check." Kyle nodded, his mind racing. Briggs suspected something, but how much did she know? Was this a test of his loyalty, or genuine ignorance about Kalara's true identity? Either way, he was now in an impossible position, ordered to spy on the very person he had promised to help. He found Kalara at her usual station, working with the kind of focused intensity that spoke of suppressed anxiety. When their eyes met, he saw a flicker of question in her gaze. He gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not here, not now." The day passed slowly. Kyle went through the motions of his security duties, while wrestling with his conscience. Every standard protocol said he should report Kalara immediately. She was a foreign national, under false identity, planning to access restricted systems for unauthorized communication with a planet under quarantine. By any measure, she was a security threat. But she was also trying to save lives, millions of them. That evening, Kyle found Kalara in the observation deck's smaller viewing chamber, staring out at the stars. The new dawn was passing through a nebula, and the view was spectacular swirls of cosmic gas in shades of purple and gold, lit by the distant fires of newborn stars. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, standing beside her. "On Alpha, we have a saying," Kalara replied, without looking at him. "The stars are eternal, but our time beneath them is borrowed." I never understood what it meant until now. Kyle studied her profile. "Commander Briggs has assigned me to watch you." Kalara's shoulders tensed. "Then you know what you have to do." "Do I?" Kyle turned to face her fully. "Because I'm not sure anymore what duty really means." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. Finally, Kalara spoke. "There's something I haven't told you about Althan physiology. We're compatible with human genetics. More than compatible, our species can interbreed, and the offspring tend to be stronger than either parent species." She paused, her bioluminescent patterns flickering nervously. "The conservative faction has been suppressing that information too. They think it's barbaric, that it would lead to the contamination of pure Althan bloodlines." Kyle felt his heart rate increase. "Why are you telling me this?" Kalara turned to face him, her alien features soft in the starlight. "Because if you're going to risk everything to help me, you should know all the consequences. If we're discovered together, if our association becomes intimate, it won't just be a matter of security violations. It will be seen as something far more personal." The implication hung between them like a quantum entanglement. Two particles forever connected, their fates intertwined regardless of distance. Kyle found himself stepping closer, drawn not just by attraction, but by something deeper. Something that spoke to the fundamental connection between conscious beings. "And if I'm willing to accept those consequences?" he asked quietly. Instead of answering directly, Kalara reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Her skin was warmer than he expected, and he could feel a subtle vibration, like a low-frequency hum that resonated through his bones. "Then help me save my people," she whispered, "and I'll warm your bed to keep you close. Not just tonight, but for as long as you'll have me." The kiss that followed was electric in more ways than one. Kyle felt a literal charge pass between them, Kalara's bioelectric patterns responding to his touch, creating patterns of light that danced across her skin like aurora borealis. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Kyle realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about duty or justice anymore. It had become personal in the most fundamental way. When he asked, knowing she'd understand what he meant. "Tomorrow night. The quantum array runs its maintenance cycle at 0300 hours. There's a 15-minute window when the security protocols reset." Kyle nodded. "I'll get you in." What he didn't say, what they both understood, was that after tomorrow night, there would be no going back. Whatever happened, their fates were now bound together, like the binary stars, visible through the observation port, locked in an eternal dance that would either create something beautiful or tear them both apart. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Kyle performed his duties mechanically, his mind constantly returning to the night ahead. He reviewed security protocols, memorized guard rotations, and planned their route to the restricted sectors. Every interaction with other crew members felt like a performance, a careful construction of normalcy to mask the revolution brewing beneath the surface. Commander Briggs called him in for an afternoon briefing, and Kyle wondered if she could somehow sense his intent. "Your observations of our Kazai translator," she began without preamble. "Anything unusual to report?" Kyle chose his words carefully. "She maintains a regular schedule, performs her duties, efficiently keeps to herself. If she's hiding something, she's very good at it." "Indeed." Briggs studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You know, Lieutenant, I've been in command a long time. I've learned to trust my instincts about people, and my instincts tell me that Lara is not what she appears to be." Kyle's blood ran cold. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones that appear most innocent. Keep watching her, Lieutenant. And if you discover anything at all, you bring it to me immediately. The safety of this ship and everyone aboard her depends on it." "Yes, Commander." As Kyle left Briggs's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. Was he walking into a trap? Was Kalara? The thought of her being captured, imprisoned, possibly executed for espionage, made his stomach twist. But the alternative, doing nothing while millions died, was unthinkable. At 0200 hours, Kyle made his way to the designated meeting point, a service corridor near the Quantum Communication Center. The ship's night cycle was in full effect, corridors dimmed, and most crew asleep. His security clearance allowed him to move freely, but his heart pounded with each step. Kalara was waiting for him, no longer disguised as a Kazai. Without the carefully applied makeup and posture modifications, she was breathtaking. Her natural skin had a subtle iridescent quality, and the bioluminescent patterns that marked her as royalty were clearly visible, creating intricate designs along her arms and neck. She wore a simple black jumpsuit that accentuated her tall, elegant frame. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I gave you my word." Kyle checked his chronometer. "We have 12 minutes once the protocols reset. Are you ready?" Kalara nodded, producing a small device from her pocket. "This contains the quantum encryption keys I need to contact my allies on Alpha. Once I establish the connection, I'll have maybe 5 minutes to transmit the evidence." "Evidence?" "Satellite data showing the true scope of the evacuation, recorded conversations from government officials, stellar collapse projections, everything that proves what's really happening." Her patterns flickered with anger. "My people deserve to know the truth." Kyle led her through a maze of corridors, avoiding main pathways and using his security access to bypass locked doors. The quantum communication center was located in the heart of the ship, surrounded by layers of security that would normally be impenetrable. But Kyle knew, the systems knew, the schedules knew where the cameras couldn't see. They reached the final checkpoint at 0301 hours. Kyle placed his hand on the biometric scanner, and the massive door slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond lay the Quantum Communication Center, a cathedral of technology filled with quantum processors that hummed with barely contained power. The main array was a thing of beauty, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them, creating an almost hypnotic display of colors and patterns. 5 minutes, Kyle whispered as they entered. Kalara moved to the central console, with practiced efficiency, connecting her device to the quantum array. Immediately, streams of data began flowing across holographic displays, alien text, and symbols that meant nothing to Kyle, but seemed to energize Kalara. "I'm in," she breathed. "I'm actually accessing the Alpha network." For the next few minutes, Kyle watched as Kalara worked her fingers dancing across alien interfaces with desperate precision. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsed in rhythm, with the data flow creating a visual symphony of light and information. "There," she said finally. "Transmission complete. The evidence is being distributed to resistance cells across the planet and to Althan representatives in the Alliance." Kyle was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights bathed the communication center, and he heard the heavy footsteps of security personnel approaching. "We need to go, now!" But it was too late. The doors burst open, and Commander Briggs entered with a full security team, weapons drawn. "Step away from the console, both of you," Briggs commanded, her voice cutting through the alarms. Kyle instinctively moved in front of Kalara, who was still connected to the quantum array. "Commander, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, Lieutenant. But first, I want to hear from our guest." Briggs focused on Kalara. "Princess Althan Kalara. Yes, I know who you are. Did you really think we wouldn't notice an alien royal moving through our ship with forged documentation?" Kalara straightened, her royal bearing becoming apparent. "I did what I had to do to save my people. By compromising Alliance security. By manipulating one of my officers." Briggs stepped closer, her expression hard. "You've committed espionage against the Alliance. The penalty for that is spacing." Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. Spacing ejection into the vacuum of space. It was the ultimate punishment for the ultimate crime. "Commander, please," Kyle began, but Briggs held up a hand. "You're in enough trouble, Lieutenant. Aiding and abetting espionage, accessing restricted systems, without authorization, compromising your oath as a security officer." Her eyes were cold as ice. "I should have you both spaced." Kyle caught the nuance in her words. Briggs was quiet for a moment, then dismissed her security team with a gesture. They hesitated, but obeyed, leaving the three of them alone in the Quantum Communication Center. "Sit down, both of you," Briggs said, her tone shifting slightly. "We need to talk." Kyle and Kalara exchanged glances, but complied, taking seats at a nearby console. Briggs remained standing, pacing slowly as she spoke. 3 months ago, the Alliance received a formal request from the Althan government for evacuation assistance. They claimed it was a precautionary measure due to stellar instabilities. They requested transport for approximately 50,000 individuals, the government, military leadership, essential personnel. She paused in her pacing. What they didn't mention was that Alpha has a population of 60 million. Kyle felt sick. The scale of the deception was staggering. "Our intelligence services have suspected something was wrong for weeks," Briggs continued. "But we had no proof, no way to verify the situation on Alpha due to the communication blackout. Until now." She turned to Kalara. "Your transmission tonight, it wasn't just sent to Alpha. Was it you copied the Alliance Council on everything?" Kalara lifted her chin defiantly. "I sent the evidence to anyone who would listen. Your council, the Galactic Court, the Independent Systems Alliance. The truth will spread too far to be contained." "Good," Briggs said, surprising them both. "Because now we can act." Kyle stared at the commander. You're not going to arrest us. Oh, I should. You've violated more regulations than I care to count. Briggs sat down across from them. But sometimes, regulations must bow to larger concerns, like preventing genocide. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Genocide. That's what the Althan government was planning: selective extinction, based on wealth and status. The Alliance Council is already convening emergency sessions, Briggs continued. Your evidence princess has forced their hand. They have no choice but to intervene now that the truth is public. But is it too late? Kalara asked. How much time do we have before the star collapses? According to our astrophysics team, 6 months. Maybe less. Briggs leaned back in her chair. Which brings us to the question of what to do with you two. Kyle tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Officially, you've committed serious crimes. Unofficially, you've probably saved millions of lives and prevented a humanitarian catastrophe. Briggs studied them both carefully. The Alliance needs someone to act as liaison with Altha, someone the people trust, someone who can help coordinate the real evacuation. Kalara's patterns brightened with hope. You want me to return to Altha? As an official Alliance representative, with full diplomatic immunity and a staff of evacuation coordinators. Briggs turned to Kyle. Including a security chief with extensive experience in interspecies operations. Kyle felt the offer settle over him like a warm cloak. You're asking me to go with her. I'm offering you both a chance to see this through, to make sure the crimes you committed tonight actually serve a purpose. Briggs smiled slightly. Besides, our anthropologists are quite interested in Princess Kalara's claims about human-Althan genetic compatibility. If true, it could be the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. Kyle looked at Kalara, seeing her bioluminescent patterns pulse with excitement and possibility. The offer was everything they could have hoped for: a chance to save her people, to work together, to explore the connection that had formed between them. There is one condition, Briggs added. This mission will require complete transparency. No more secrets, no more deception. The Alliance needs to trust you both completely. Agreed, Kalara said immediately. She turned to Kyle, her expression questioning. Kyle thought of his career, his life aboard the New Dawn, everything he would be leaving behind. Then he thought of Kalara's desperate courage, of the millions of lives hanging in the balance of the possibility of something greater than anything he had imagined. When do we leave? He asked. 6 months later, Kyle stood on the bridge of the Alliance evacuation ship, Harmony watching, as the blue-green marble of Altha grew larger in the view screen. Beside him, Kalara wore the formal robes of an Alliance diplomatic envoy, her bioluminescent patterns glowing with pride and anticipation. The evacuation had been a massive success. Working together, the Alliance and the Althan resistance had managed to relocate 58 million people to various worlds throughout the galaxy. The remaining 2 million had chosen to stay either as part of the essential crew, maintaining the evacuation, or as volunteers helping with the final stages of cultural preservation. There, Kalara pointed to a continent on the planet's surface. The northern province where the royal palace stands. My family should be waiting. Kyle took her hand, feeling the familiar electric tingle of their connection. Over the past months, their relationship had deepened beyond mere attraction. They had worked together, bled together, stood against political pressure from both their species together. The child growing in Kalara's womb, the first documented human-Althan hybrid, had become a symbol of hope for both cultures. Are you ready to go home? He asked. Kalara smiled, her patterns flickering, in the pattern Kyle had learned, meant contentment, mixed with excitement. I am home, she said, squeezing his hand. Wherever you are, that's home. As the Harmony entered Altha's atmosphere, Kyle marveled at how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a simple security officer, content with his routine duties, aboard a ship he had never planned to leave. Now, he was a diplomatic envoy, soon to be a father bound to an alien princess, who had shown him what it meant to put conscience above regulation. The Althan sun hung in the sky above them, no longer the healthy yellow star it had once been, but a swollen red giant preparing for its final death throes. Soon, it would collapse into a white dwarf, making the planet uninhabitable. But its people were safe, scattered across the galaxy, like seeds on stellar winds, ready to grow into something new. As they descended toward the royal spaceport, Kyle could see crowds gathering despite the late hour. The evacuation had been successful, but it had also fundamentally changed Althan society. The old rigid hierarchies had crumbled, replaced by a more egalitarian government that valued merit over bloodline. Kalara would soon be crowned, not as a traditional princess, but as the first elected leader of the Althan people, their representative to the galaxy. "Look," Kalara pointed to the gathered crowd below. "They're here to welcome us home." Kyle smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "They're here to welcome their future." As the Harmony touched down on Althan soil for the last time, Kyle felt a sense of completion that went beyond personal satisfaction. They had done something that mattered, something that would echo through generations. The secret Kalara had offered to keep in exchange for warming his bed had grown into something far greater. A love that had transcended species, a partnership that had saved millions, and a promise of what could be achieved when beings chose to trust each other across the vast distances that separated their worlds. The ship's doors opened, and Kyle and Kalara stepped out together into the red glow of Altha's dying sun. The crowd erupted in cheers that required no translation, a universal expression of joy and gratitude. Children ran forward with flowers, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in the patterns of celebration. An elderly Althan approached them, his scales marked with the intricate scarification of the high aristocracy. Kyle tensed momentarily, remembering the role the nobility had played in the near genocide, but Kalara stepped forward without hesitation. "Grandfather," she said, embracing the old man warmly. "Kalara, my brave granddaughter." He held her at arm's length, studying her face. "You look radiant. Motherhood suits you. Grandfather, this is Kyle Reeves, my partner, and the father of my child." The old Althan turned to Kyle, his eyes showing the kind of deep intelligence that came from centuries of life. "The human who helped save our people. I owe you a debt beyond measure." "You owe me nothing," Kyle replied. "It was the right thing to do." "Perhaps, but gratitude is not lessened by duty." He gestured toward the crowd. "Come. Your people want to see you both." As they walked through the cheering crowds, Kyle noticed something that filled him with hope. Among the Althans were humans, Zephyrians, Hydrons, and dozens of other species, all working together in the final phases of the evacuation. The crisis had brought out the best in the galactic community, creating bonds that would outlast the dying star above them. A young Althan reporter approached with a recording device. "Princess Kalara, can you comment on the reports that your child will be the first of a new hybrid species?" Kalara exchanged a glance with Kyle before answering. "My child will be many things Althan human, a citizen of the galaxy. But most importantly, they will be proof that love and cooperation can create something beautiful, even in the darkest of times." "And what message do you have for those who said this interspecies relationship was impossible, even dangerous?" Kyle stepped forward. "We've learned that the only dangerous thing is allowing fear to overcome compassion. Our relationship began as an act of resistance. Kalara trusted me with her secret, and I chose to help rather than report her. That trust grew into something neither of us expected, but both of us needed." As the interview concluded, and they continued through the crowd, Kyle reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with observation, with noticing things others had missed. It had progressed through deception, danger, and moral quandaries that had no easy answers. But it had led to this, to salvation for millions, to a love that transcended species, to the promise of a future where the artificial boundaries between peoples might finally begin to crumble. That night in the royal palace that would soon be abandoned forever, Kyle and Kalara lay together in the traditional Althan bedchamber. The walls were transparent crystal, offering a view of the stars that seemed close enough to touch. Kalara's patterns glowed softly in the darkness, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat and the heartbeat of the child she carried. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to help me." Kyle considered the question. He had given up his career in Alliance security, his home aboard the New Dawn, his entire previous life. But looking at Kalara, feeling the life growing within her, knowing that millions of Althans were alive because of the choice they had made together, he couldn't imagine regretting any of it. "The only thing I regret," he said, tracing one of her glowing patterns with his finger, "is that we didn't meet sooner." Kalara smiled, her patterns brightening. "My people have another saying, the stars arrange themselves for those who dare to reach. I think you were always meant to find me, just as I was meant to trust you with my secret. And now we'll raise our child among the stars, a living bridge between our peoples. They'll never know a universe where love between species is forbidden, where millions die because of the prejudices of a few." She shifted closer to him, her warmth encompassing him, like the solar wind of a gentle star. "That's a legacy worth any sacrifice." Outside their window, the red giant that had been Altha's sun continued its death spiral, growing larger and more ominous each day. But inside their crystal chamber, surrounded by the love they had built from desperation and trust, Kyle and Kalara looked toward a future where their child, and all the children who would follow, would inherit a galaxy, a little less divided, a little more hopeful. The evacuation ships had carried more than just refugees to safety. They had carried the possibility of transformation, the seed of something new. As Kyle drifted off to sleep beside the alien princess, who had become his world, he knew that their love story was just the beginning. In laboratories across the galaxy, scientists were already studying their unique genetic compatibility. Other interspecies couples were coming forward, inspired by their example. The walls between civilizations were beginning to crumble, replaced by bridges built from understanding and trust. 3 months later, aboard the Alliance medical ship, Hope Kyle held his daughter for the first time. She was perfect, a beautiful fusion of human and Althan characteristics. Her skin had the subtle iridescence of her mother's people, with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed gently with each breath. But her eyes were clearly human, bright and curious as they focused on his face. "She's beautiful," Dr. Harrison, the chief medical officer, said, as she monitored both mother and child. "The genetic integration is remarkable. She appears to have the best traits of both species: enhanced cognitive capacity from the Althan side, incredible adaptability from the human side." Kalara, exhausted but radiant, reached up to touch the baby's face. "What should we name her?" Kyle thought for a moment. They had discussed many names over the past months, both human and Althan. But looking at his daughter now, seeing the way she seemed to glow with inner light, one name felt perfect. "Nova," he said. "She'll be our Nova, a new star born from the collision of two others." Kalara smiled. "Nova Reeves Kalara, first daughter of the stars." As Kyle watched Nova's patterns pulse in rhythm with her mother's, he realized that their story had come full circle. What had begun with secrets and deception had evolved into transparency and truth. What had started as an impossible love between species had become the foundation for a new kind of future. The Althan sun was finally gone, now collapsed into a white dwarf that would burn cold for billions of years. But from its death had come life, not just the survival of the Althan people, but the birth of something unprecedented. Nova was the first, but she wouldn't be the last. Already other human Althan couples were announcing pregnancies, along with couples from other species who had been inspired by their example. 6 months later, Kyle stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching the ships come and go from the busy spaceport. Kalara was beside him, Nova sleeping peacefully in her arms. They were on their way to Earth, where Kyle would introduce his wife and daughter to his own family. From there, they would travel to New Altha, the planet the refugees had chosen as their new home, A world that would be governed not by ancient bloodlines, but by elected representatives from all species. Kyle, Kalara said softly, do you remember what you said to me that first night when you told me you'd help? I said duty to conscience outweighs duty to regulations. Yes, but there was something else. She shifted Nova, so Kyle could see their daughter's face. You said that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the legal thing to do. Kyle nodded, remembering. I did say that. Look around, Kalara gestured to the station around them. Look at what that philosophy has created. Kyle looked. The station was a bustling hub of interspecies activity. He saw humans working alongside Althans, their children playing together in the common areas. He saw couples from dozens of different species, no longer hiding their relationships, but celebrating them openly. The security protocols had been rewritten to accommodate the new reality of interspecies families. The legal definitions of citizenship, marriage, and kinship had been expanded to include biological impossibilities that had become biological realities. The universe is changing, Kyle. And it's changing because two people looked at an unjust situation and decided to do something about it. Consequences be damned. 3 people, Kyle corrected, watching Nova's tiny fingers curl around his thumb. Don't forget our little Nova here. She's going to grow up in a galaxy where none of this seems unusual, Kalara mused. To her, it will be perfectly normal to have friends and family from a dozen different species. She'll never know what it was like when fear and prejudice kept us apart. A chime sounded through the station, announcing the departure of the transport to Earth. As they gathered their belongings and made their way to the docking bay, Kyle reflected on how much had changed since that night in the Missal when he first confronted Kalara about her true identity. He had been a security officer, then focused on regulations and protocols. Now he was a father, a husband, a diplomat working to build bridges between worlds. The new dawn seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 2 years. Sometimes, he missed the simplicity of his old life, the clarity of black and white rules and clear-cut duties. But then, he looked at Kalara and Nova, at the family they had built from courage and trust, and he knew he wouldn't trade this complexity for all the simplicity in the galaxy. Love, it turned out, was messy, and complicated, and wonderful, and terrifying all at once. It didn't fit neatly into regulations or protocols. It created its own rules, demanded its own sacrifices, offered its own rewards. As their ship lifted off from New Geneva Station, beginning the journey to Earth, Kyle held his wife and daughter close and watched the stars stream past the viewport. Somewhere out there on dozens of worlds, Althan refugees were building new lives, contributing their knowledge and culture to the galactic community. Somewhere out there, other impossible love stories were beginning, other walls between species were crumbling. The girl who had offered to warm his bed to keep her secret had given him so much more than that. She had given him a purpose, a family, a future that stretched beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. And in return, he had given her his trust, his love, his unwavering support in the face of impossible odds. It was, Kyle thought, as Nova stirred in her sleep, her bioluminescent patterns flickering like a tiny constellation, the best trade he had ever made. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, but the galaxy they illuminated was transforming with each passing day. Love, it seemed, was indeed a force, powerful enough to reshape the universe itself. And sometimes, all it took was one person brave enough to share a secret, and another person willing to help them keep it. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward Earth and the next chapter of their lives, Kyle kissed the top of Nova's head and whispered a promise to his sleeping daughter. You're going to inherit a galaxy full of possibilities, little Nova, and your mother and I are going to make sure you have the courage to reach for every single one. The stars streaked past in bands of light, and the future raced to meet them, bright with the promise of love that knew no boundaries, no limits, no artificial divisions. In the end, Kyle realized that was what they had really accomplished. They hadn't just saved the Althan people, they had helped save the galaxy's capacity for hope, for connection, for love. that transcended the vast emptiness between worlds. And that was a legacy that would burn bright long after the last stars had died.